There's a sentence that gets drilled into your brain sometime between your first job and your first existential crisis. Stop throwing money away on rent. You've heard it from your parents, your uncle who flipped one house in 2004 and never shut up about it, and every financial influencer who's ever posed in front of a Tesla they don't own. And for most of the 20th century, they weren't wrong. Buying a home was genuinely one of the best financial decisions an American could make. It was the bedrock of the middle class, the path to generational wealth, and apparently the only acceptable way to prove you were a functioning adult. But here's the thing about bedrock. Sometimes it shifts. And right now, for a growing number of Americans, the math behind homeownership is quietly falling apart. And the people selling you the dream have a very good reason not to tell you. Let's start with the number nobody puts in the brochure: the true cost of owning a home.
Because when people say buying beats renting, they're usually only counting the mortgage payment. But that's a bit like saying flying is free because you ignored the ticket price. Because on top of your mortgage, you've got property taxes, homeowners insurance, HOA fees if you're lucky enough to live somewhere that charges you monthly for the privilege of being told what color your mailbox can be. And then there's maintenance. The general rule of thumb is that homeowners should budget 1% to 2% of their home's value annually just for upkeep. On a $400,000 home, that's $4,000 to $8,000 a year, every year, just to keep the thing from falling apart. And nobody talks about that because it's not exciting. There's no viral TikTok about replacing a water heater. But here's where it gets really uncomfortable, because we need to talk about opportunity cost, the thing that accountants love and everyone else pretends doesn't exist. When you buy a home today, the average down payment in the United States sits somewhere around $60,000. And let's be generous and say you scrape that together. The moment that money goes toward a down payment, it's locked. It's illiquid. It's not working for you in any other way. But if you had invested that $60,000 into a low-cost S&P 500 index fund and left it alone, historically it would double approximately every 7 to 10 years. We're talking $120,000 becoming $240,000, becoming $480,000, all while you were just existing. Now, does a house appreciate too? Yes, but here's the part that hurts. After accounting for inflation, the average annual return on residential real estate in the United States over the last century sits at roughly 1%. 1% in real terms. That's not a typo. Yale economist Robert Shiller spent decades on this data. 1%. The stock market over the same period returned closer to 7% annually after inflation. So when your uncle says his house tripled in value, what he's really saying is that inflation did most of the heavy lifting while he was busy taking credit for it. And then 2020 happened, and everything got worse. Because during the pandemic, something crept into the housing market that fundamentally broke the game for regular buyers. Institutional investors. We're talking about hedge funds, private equity firms, and real estate investment trusts that decided single-family homes weren't just shelter, they were an asset class. Invitation Homes, the largest single-family rental company in the country, now owns over 80,000 homes. And they are alone. Between 2020 and 2023, institutional investors bought up an estimated 3% of all homes sold in major metro areas.
That number sounds small until you realize they were concentrating their purchases in the most affordable neighborhoods, specifically to absorb the inventory that first-time buyers were competing for. So you weren't just competing against another young couple who also saved up a down payment. You were competing against a firm with an unlimited balance sheet, paying cash, waiving inspections, and planning to rent that home back to you. Let me say that again. They bought your starter home, and now they're your landlord. Which brings us to the mortgage rate problem. Because even if you find a home, even if you outbid the hedge fund, you're doing it with a 30-year mortgage at rates that, after sitting near historic lows for over a decade, shot back up so fast that monthly payments on a median-priced home more than doubled between 2021 and 2023 alone. That's not a market adjustment. That's a wealth transfer in slow motion. So what does a smart renter actually do with all of this? Because here's the part of the video where I stop complaining and get practical. Because renting isn't the same as giving up. It's a decision. And like any financial decision, it only wins if you're intentional with the alternative. The renter's advantage is flexibility and liquidity. A renter who takes the down payment they would have used, invests it consistently, and keeps housing costs below 30% of their income, that renter can legitimately out-accumulate a homeowner over a 20-year horizon in a high-cost market. Not in every market, not in every scenario, but in enough of them that the blanket advice of always buy deserves a serious reality check. Now, am I saying never buy a home? No. Homeownership still makes sense in plenty of situations. Stable income, long time horizon, lower cost of living markets, or if the home just genuinely means something to you beyond a spreadsheet. That's valid. Life isn't a financial model. But what I am saying is that the narrative that renting is failure and buying is wisdom is outdated, oversimplified, and in today's market, potentially dangerous advice for a generation that's already been handed the worst housing affordability conditions since records began. The dream was sold to your parents in a different market, at different rates, at different prices, by different sellers. And the people still selling it to you today, they're not worried about your net worth. They're worried about their commission. Drop your take in the comments. Are you renting by choice or by circumstance? And do you think the math still favors buying in today's market? Because I've seen the numbers, and I'm genuinely curious where you land.